Okay, so it's now it's 5:10 a.m. Oh, this is the final video. I am on the moon. That's the moon behind me. I've got a little shed in the moon, you know. I'm living here. I'm just waiting. So, let's get in with the video. Ignore what I said. What's Jackson gonna do?
But Clay had made a fundamental miscalculation about the character of Andrew Jackson.
Yes, he did.
A character that was exemplified by an event that took place in the midst of the battle over the bank. At the president's request, a Navy surgeon was brought to the White House to operate on a painful shoulder. The problem was a simple one. There was a bullet in it. 20 years before, during the War of 1812, Major General Jackson became embroiled in a feud between one of his officers and a prominent Nashville family. Instead of mediating the dispute, as might have been expected of a man of his stature, General Jackson took part in a full-scale gun battle. During it, he was shot at point-blank range and almost died. This saga defined the character of Andrew Jackson. He could not pass up a fight, and when he fought, he was willing to risk everything. Of the bank, he declared,
"The bank is trying to kill me, but I will kill it."
On July 10th, 1832, Jackson vetoed the bill reauthorizing the bank. The president's address in defense of the veto was perhaps the most important of his life, for he had to explain to the American people, not with bombast, but with words from his heart, why he so fervently opposed the bank.
It is to be regretted that the rich and powerful too often bend the acts of government to their selfish purposes. When the laws undertake to make the rich richer and the potent more powerful, the humble members of society, the farmers, the mechanics, and laborers, who have neither the time nor the means of securing like favors to themselves, have a right to complain of the injustice of their government. We can at least take a stand against any prostitution of our government to the advancement of the few at the expense of the many.
To help rally support for Jackson's re-election campaign in 1832, the president and his closest advisor, Martin Van Buren, came up with one of the boldest strokes in American political history. They founded the Democratic Party.
Jackson thought of the democracy, as it was called. It wasn't called the Democratic Party, it was called the democracy. Thought of it as the association of the vast majority of Americans, the majority that should govern, to make sure that they would govern. There are all sorts of ways in which ordinary people can participate. Jackson thinks that's important because the ordinary people have to associate more because they don't have the resources that the rich and the well-born do.
For years, Jackson's opponents had lampooned his frontier roots by portraying him as a jackass. To their shock, the Jacksonians began embracing the symbol.
Well, the donkey as a symbol of the Democratic Party started out as a satire, as an attack on the rubish, sort of Beverly Hillbillies nature of Jackson's Democratic Party. But interesting, people like Henry Clay and others didn't quite understand that in urban settings, the donkey may have been a figure of fun, but for people in rural America, which was most of America at the time, the donkey was essential to daily life, and it was someone you could rely on. And Jackson and the Democrats were presenting themselves as people you could rely on.
Huh. I never knew that.
A second party quickly arose to oppose the Democrats. Called the National Republicans, they chose Jackson's fiercest rival, Henry Clay, to run against him for president.
Henry Clay and Andrew Jackson hated each other. Clay saw himself as a great American statesman and couldn't quite understand how this rube from the Carolina backcountry, who'd never gone to school, who'd never read a book in Clay's view, could possibly be so powerful and have such a hold over the people, thereby ensuring that Clay himself would never do that, because he didn't appreciate, I think, Jackson's gifts of both charisma and the power of his personality.
Now, real fast, Henry Clay, when he made it into Congress in the House, I believe House of Representatives, he was a freshman. He gave such great speeches and had such a deep, booming voice. He was voted Speaker of the House as a incoming freshman. When everyone tabs you as kind of like Speaker of the House, you are the next thing. Back then, Speaker of the Vice President was nothing. That was garbage. Speaker of the House, man, you were practically like next in line to the presidency, even though I don't think there had ever been a Speaker of the House to go on to become president. Secretary of War was pretty much, no, Secretary of State? Secretary of War? I don't remember now. Anyways, that was the next logical stepping stone. Speaker of the House, there hadn't been a Speaker of the House president up until Jackson was number 7, so I would think it would have been number 11, James K. Polk. But he was a former Speaker of the House who stepped down, and this isn't about Polk. But, so it hadn't happened yet. But when you're Clay, and you're put into the situation where everyone in Congress is kind of, you've become an accepted leader. Congress had a lot of power, and they didn't think the president should have as much. So if you're the Speaker of the House, you're kind of in a way a leader. You are a president to them because you have a lot to say. The saying was the president didn't have to sign a bill. Sign a law or a bill. Sign a bill to become law. Speaker of the House did, though. So if you're the Speaker of the House, as Henry Clay was, man, you're wielding an awful lot of power. So Henry Clay didn't understand why all these people had given him this power. They had respected him. The people respected him. The people looked at Henry Clay as he could really be a great president. And then when he would come around to say, I'm running for president, people were like, yeah, we're going to vote for that guy. And then it came time to vote, and people were like, I don't know. This other guy, I think he's got it. Henry Clay, though, let's keep him where he is because he's really good. Next time. That was Henry Clay. Next time. His next time never became time, though.
During the election campaign, Jackson and his advisors again demonstrated complete mastery of the media tools available to them.
This man was sitting for his portrait again and again and again. Jackson had a sense that I want the American people to know me and to know what I look like. And I think that says something about his political sense. He's a first in many ways, and he's the first president that I know who had a desire to use the media to communicate with the American people.
On election day, voters flocked to the polls in record numbers. And thanks to Jackson's reputation as a military hero and his continuing expansion of America, they gave Old Hickory a landslide victory.
Also something to consider, Jackson got to be president when they opened up voting for everyone. So, he, in a way, for his re-election campaign, he's going back to basics. He's getting the people to get amped up for him, to want to vote for him again. When all these other politicians, they were used to the, I don't want to say the spoils system, but they were used to the system of being elected by the upper class. I keep doing this, but by the upper class, white, rich people. So why reach out to the regular farmer? Why reach out to the person who doesn't have a lot of money? Why reach out to them? They're not going to help you. But now in this changing voice of America, those people that you're ignoring, Jackson's embracing. Those people that you're not thinking about are smart enough because you're focused on all these upper tier people. Well, let's think about it. The upper tier, you're talking maybe a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 rich people compared to, there was 12.5 million people, they said. You're looking at 1,000 people to get you into the presidency, and you're going to look past 12.4 plus million people. What do you think your odds are of winning? Not good. Jackson used the media because he got back to basics, and all these other people, they just didn't do that. Or didn't do it as well.
But what Andrew Jackson read into the victory was that he now had a mandate to destroy the Bank of the United States. And so the president ordered the government's money removed from the bank. But even some in his own cabinet thought such a step was illegal. And Jackson had to replace 2 Treasury secretaries before finding a third who would obey him.
Nothing like this would happen again until Richard Nixon, during the Watergate crisis, had to go through 3 attorneys general to find one who would fire Archibald Cox as special prosecutor.
On the floor of the U.S. Senate, Henry Clay asserted that nothing less than the future of American democracy was at stake.
We are in the midst of a revolution, hitherto bloodless, but rapidly tending toward the concentration of all power in the hands of one man.
For the only time in American history, the Senate censured the president. People throughout the nation began calling it the Bank War.
For my non-American viewers, to censure, so to impeach, the House will vote. It's kind of like being convicted. It gets, well, okay, imagine the House impeaches you. It's kind of like the police pressing charges. Then it gets sent to the Senate or the courts. The Senate then either they hold a trial and they find you guilty or innocent, much like a court. You can be found guilty and removed. You can not be charged at all. The Senate may not even vote to take it up. But once you're impeached, it's kind of like you were found guilty, but you were never charged in court. I know it's weird. Censure is a step down. Censure is kind of like everyone saying, you did wrong, but we don't think it was enough to impeach you. Or we don't think we can get the impeachment passed. The difference is that once you're impeached, you can't have that removed. That's on your record. You can be censured, and then that can be overturned later on.
It was a war in which reason and
Foreshadowing.
economics were the casualties, and the chief combatants were Jackson and the president of the bank, Nicholas Biddle.
That's me.
The confrontation between Andrew Jackson and the Bank of the United States escalated, you might almost say, beyond the bounds of sanity. From the point of view of Nicholas Biddle, President of the Bank of the United States, this maniac president was going to destroy the American economy. And both sides got so wrapped up in it that they did reckless things. Nicholas Biddle, in an effort to procure a recharter, actually triggered what was called a panic in those days, a stock market crash and a brief depression.
Now just think about that. Jackson was worried the bank had too much power. The bank feared Jackson would take away their charter. So they triggered a panic to get Jackson to back off. All you've done is just prove the point as to why Jackson kind of was right. You do hold too much power. And it was like Jackson was fishing, and then eventually the bank just was like, hey, what's that tasty little shiny thing in the water that looks like this? Hey, let's just go over and put our mouth on it. And he reeled him in.
Not realizing that in doing this, he was proving every point Jackson made about the reckless power that the Bank of the United States held over ordinary Americans' lives.
Yep.
Finally, in 1836, the bank's charter expired and its doors were closed, and Andrew Jackson once again emerged from a battle victorious.
An historian has written that every once in a while in American history, it becomes necessary to save American capitalism from the capitalists, that left to their own devices, they will so accrete power that they will end up ruining the economy. Well, Jackson in some ways saw that was the beginning of that process, as American capitalism was just beginning to develop. He saw that to keep the system going in a democratic fashion, as he saw it, it was necessary that accountability had to be there in the system in a way that it did not seem to be as of 1832.
Jackson's battles during his second term in office were not just political. One afternoon, as the president was leaving the Capitol, a mentally ill man who believed that Jackson had killed his father approached him. The explosion of the pistol's percussion cap convinced bystanders that the president had been shot. But the gunpowder inside the pistol failed to ignite. The assailant then drew a second pistol and fired point blank into the president's chest. Miraculously, the powder inside the second gun also failed to ignite. As a result, Andrew Jackson survived the first assassination attempt ever against an American president.
So after the man shot him twice, and it didn't fire, Jackson proceeded to beat the man with his cane, and people around Jackson had to pull him off, fearing that he was going to beat the man to death. I mean, what would you do in that situation? You'd probably attack.
Then, in the presidential election of 1836, Jackson's hand-picked successor, Martin Van Buren, rode Old Hickory's coattails to victory.
Martin Van Buren, by the way, had John C. Calhoun, his first vice president. When they stopped talking in one of the previous episodes, they parted ways after that. Martin Van Buren was like, I don't remember what he was now, but he was in the cabinet, and he was a guy who really Jackson, listened to. He became Jackson's vice president, so he went on to do that. And for people who are curious, Martin Van Buren was the president during the Amistad situation. If anyone knows about that, fantastic movie. Silence of the Lambs guy. Oh, jeez. He ends up playing John Quincy Adams in that, who defended the slaves in the Amistad. Ugh. Anyways, back to the video.
On March 4th, 1837, Andrew Jackson's tumultuous presidency came to an end. In a sign of the remarkable changes that had taken place during his years in office, he left Washington not in a carriage pulled by horses, as he had arrived 8 years before, but on a train car pulled by a steam-powered locomotive. To a reporter, Jackson said,
After 8 years as president, I have only 2 regrets. That I have not shot Henry Clay or hanged John C. Calhoun.
That's what it was.
the legacy Andrew Jackson left behind him was a complicated one. But if there was one key feature that would allow future generations to make sense of it all, it was the way in which Jackson's fight for the rights of the average white man pointed the way for others to seek rights of their own.
Jacksonian democracy had no room in it for black people. It was not willing to free the slaves. It had utter contempt for the political aspirations of women, and everybody knows it was utterly violent and merciless to the Indians. But look how the victims of Jacksonian democracy defended themselves. They didn't go out and become monarchists. Instead, what they did was to take the principles of Jacksonian democracy and demand that they be applied to them too. When you look at the feminists, they used the Declaration of Independence to demand the right to vote. When you look at the abolitionists, they said the demand for human equality is good for the slaves as well. When the Indians wanted to defend themselves against white encroachment, the Cherokees created a written constitution and a democratic government of their own, so that the abolitionists, the feminists, the Indians all responded to this aggressive Jacksonian democracy, not by becoming monarchists, but by saying, we have to have some too.
Jackson spent the remaining years of his life at his beloved Hermitage. Though others would one day see a connection between his quest for opportunity for white men and the ideal of opportunity for all, Andrew Jackson himself never did. He continued to own dozens of slaves, never worrying that they toiled from sunrise to midnight with no hope of a better life, or giving any thought to what their opinion was of him.
Sometimes when they had a funeral for a fellow slave, like at the Hermitage, they would say, one day your head must bow as low as ours, as they sang this funeral march to the grave. One day your head must bow as low as ours. When they sang that song, they're looking at Andrew Jackson, the master, as they march along. The whites think that they're just singing a great melodious song, but it had a deep meaning, and what it meant is, one day you must die too. One thing that makes all men equal is death. All men must die equally. One day your head must bow as low as ours.
On June 8, 1845, Andrew Jackson died.
He had just helped James K. Polk start his campaign. Or maybe James K. Polk had just... Yeah, I think Polk had just won. Was the 11th president. Could be wrong on that. I know Polk was president during the Mexican-American War, which was 46 to 48. So I want to say that Polk was in office then. And Polk grew up around Jackson, so Jackson had a, you know, that was a great thing for him to be able to have gotten one of his guys to become president.
America's 7th president was laid to rest beside his beloved wife Rachel in the garden at the Hermitage.
It's a beautiful, that burial.
14 years later, Jackson's first biographer, James Parton, visited the grave. The historian had already spent many months reading what hundreds of Jackson's contemporaries had to say about him. But the writer still found it nearly impossible to sum up Old Hickory.
If anyone, at the end of a year even, had asked what I had discovered respecting General Jackson, I might have answered thus. Andrew Jackson, I am given to understand, was a patriot and a traitor. He was one of the greatest generals and wholly ignorant of the art of war. A stickler for discipline, he never hesitated to disobey his superior.
Yes.
The first of statesmen, he never devised or framed a measure. He was the most candid of men and was capable of the profoundest dissimulation. He was a democratic autocrat, an urbane savage, an atrocious saint.
Discover more about Andrew Jackson. Explore the history.
Okay. Well, that was all we have about Andy Jackson, 7th president. All right. Well, I'm going to do some more president series. People's Profile has some good stuff on presidents. I know there's one with Jefferson, Washington, Adams, Madison, maybe. And then Biographics has some good ones as well. But that's not about them. It's about Andrew Jackson, and we are done. So I'm going to end this here. Like and subscribe. Oh, I'm dying. I'm okay now. Like and subscribe. And thanks for watching. Have a good day. Have a good night.